Our lead story tonight, James Comey tells his story. In a prepared statement to the Senate Intelligence Committee, released one day ahead of his hearing tomorrow, the former FBI director details his personal conversations with the president, 9 in total, compared with just 2 during 3 years with President Obama. Comey describes how Mr. Trump asked repeatedly for a pledge of personal loyalty, asked that he drop the investigation into General Michael Flynn, and complained that allegations surrounding Russia were a cloud over his presidency. Comey also confirms that he told President Trump that he was not under investigation himself. Moments ago, Mr. Trump's personal attorney responded in a written statement, quoting, "The president is pleased," it says, "that Mr. Comey has finally publicly confirmed his private reports that the president was not under investigation in any Russia probe." And continuing, he wrote, "The president feels completely and totally vindicated." Now, there's a lot to unpack here. We're going to walk through much of it now with reporter Matt Apuzzo of the New York Times and with John Carlin. He served as Assistant Attorney General for National Security from 2014 until October of last year. He's now an attorney in private practice. And let's start with their first meeting on January 6th at Trump Tower in New York. And Matt, I'm going to ask both of you right now about this, and to set a little background. It was New York City. James Comey was meeting the president for the first time. He showed up at Trump Tower to meet the president's national security team. And then privately, he and the president-elect then had a one-on-one session where Comey shared with Mr. Trump information, he called it sensitive information of a salacious nature that had been gathered as part of the Russia investigation. So with that background, here is what James Comey goes on to say. They had a meeting, here are some specifics now, beginning with a dinner at the White House 3 weeks later. Now, this is January 27th, after Mr. Trump is president. On that day, the president invited Comey over. They dined alone in the green room, and here's how Comey describes it. He says, "My instincts told me that the one-on-one setting and the pretense that this was our first discussion about my position meant the dinner was at least in part an effort to have me ask for my job and create some sort of patronage relationship. That concerned me greatly, given the FBI's traditionally independent status in the executive branch. I replied that I loved my work and I intended to stay and serve out my 10-year term as director. And then, because the setup made me uneasy, I added that I was not reliable in the way politicians use that word, but he could always count on me to tell him the truth." A few minutes later, the president said, "I need loyalty. I expect loyalty. I didn't move, speak, or change my facial expression in any way during the awkward silence that followed. We simply looked at each other in silence." Matt Apuzzo, how does this square with the reporting you've done?
Well, a lot of the details here, my colleagues and I have been reporting out here the last several weeks. But it's hard to overstate just the extraordinary nature of the portrait we're seeing here. We're really getting the backstory to the Jim Comey firing. We're seeing a president who was preoccupied with, as you said, getting the cloud lifted, the cloud of this Russia investigation that was become a real liability for the Trump administration from day one. And the idea that at this private dinner, that the president starts their relationship by asking for this loyalty pledge. You just read these memos. You can see Comey, it's just his anxiety here in the words. It's just the uncomfortable, the discomfort he has is palpable. And you can see Trump getting more and more frustrated that, why is this guy not doing what I'm asking?
John Carlin, from your perspective, what's the significance of this exchange over the president asking for loyalty?
Well, the FBI has a unique institutional role, as does the Department of Justice. And so because both the FBI and prosecutors in the Department of Justice may be called upon to investigate potential criminal activity by members of the president's party, by actual members of the administration, and in some circumstances investigate conduct of a president, him or herself, there's been a history where the department has attempted to shield itself from political interference. And there have been times in that history where maintaining that independence has been particularly fraught.
Right.
I'll say in my tenure as chief of staff at the FBI and in my time at the department, I can't recall something quite like this.
Well, and I just want to pick up on that later on in that January 27th dinner, alone with the president in the White House in the green room, Mr. Comey writes, he says, he then said, "I need loyalty." I replied, "You will always get honesty from me." He paused and then said, "That's what I want, honest loyalty." I paused and then said, "You will get that from me." Is that something, John Carlin, that was appropriate?
Well, you can see how the president's demanding loyalty that might be appropriate in some other context of a political campaign or even with other parts of the administration. But Director Comey is very focused, it looks like, in that exchange and understands the unique independence that the role of the FBI director and the reason why the statute was changed so that the FBI director's term of years is 10 years, designed to cut across administrations to ensure that the president who appointed the director, that the director would outlast the tenure of that president. And so Director Comey, I think, is trying to explain in this awkward context why he'll be honest, not disloyal in some sense, but loyal ultimately to the Constitution and the country.
Well, now I want to turn both of you to this, I think it was their next meeting, February the 14th, and a meeting in the Oval Office. Now, this time it was with the president, the vice president, the attorney general, several other senior administration officials. At the end of that meeting, the president asked everyone to leave except for Comey. And according to Mr. Comey's statement, Mr. Trump turned back to the subject of General Michael Flynn, who had been fired just the day before. And he said, quote, "I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He's a good guy. I hope you can let this go." And Comey writes, "I replied only that he is a good guy. I did not say that I would let this go." Matt Apuzzo, how does that square with what you've reported?
My colleague Michael Schmidt broke that exchange a few weeks ago, but it's no less remarkable seeing it in that full context. Seeing the president ask everybody to leave the Oval Office and speak alone with the head of the FBI and say, let Flynn go. Just that very nature. We don't have to be in Washington to understand why that makes us feel uncomfortable. I mean, anybody who's ever fought a ticket in court, knows that they don't want to feel like the criminal justice system is rigged for people who are friendly with the politicians. And so if you're at the FBI, yes, you are part of the administration, you're part of the Department of Justice, but they just don't see themselves as working for the president when it comes to criminal justice stuff. And as John said, certainly not when the investigation touches on the president's own associates.
So continuing that now, this is afterward the same day, February 14th, Comey writes he spoke with the Attorney General in person. He said, "I took the opportunity to implore the Attorney General to prevent any future direct communication between me and the president, between the president and me. I told the AG what had just happened, him being asked to leave, because the Attorney General was one of those who'd been asked to leave the Oval Office, while the FBI director, who reports to the AG, remained behind. I said that was inappropriate. It should never happen." He did not reply. John Carlin, how do we read this?
I'll tell you, there have been instances before, let's say in a terrorism incident or a major shooting, in my experience, where the White House would sometimes reach out directly to the FBI. And it raised concerns even when that was the context. And there were usual immediate calls over to the Attorney General to ensure that the department was aware of the contact directly with the White House or with immediate aides to the president. But to have the President of the United States order people out of the room in order, if true, according to this account, in order to implore the director of the FBI to drop an investigation of a friend or associate, that's the core of why many of our rules and customs were in place, was to prevent exactly that type of conversation or interference from occurring.
So now here we are a month and a half later. This is March the 30th. The president phones Jim Comey at the FBI. He repeats the idea of a cloud over his administration because of the Russia investigation. He said he had nothing to do with Russia, had not been involved with hookers in Russia, and had always assumed he was being recorded when in Russia. He asked what we could do to lift the cloud. So, Matt Apuzzo, we're back to that same scenario back and forth where the president is asking the FBI director to do something.
Yeah, and I mean, look, you can see why Donald Trump might be frustrated, right? I mean, just for setting aside the fact that he's the president, if you've been told you are not under investigation personally, but yet your administration can't escape the cloud of this investigation and you kind of just want it to be over, you can see why you say, hey, what do I have to do to make this go away? If I'm not under investigation, why can't you just say that? That's a very human response, but as John said, there's a reason and there's a process that you're supposed to go through when you reach out on stuff like this.
So, and just finally, John, we're not showing any more of graphics from the statement, but it was on March the 30th. There was another phone call where the president again called complaining about the cloud over his presidency. And in that conversation, he said if there were some satellite associates of his who did something wrong, it would be good to find that out, but that he hadn't done anything wrong and hoped I would find a way to get it out there. And then he called Mr. Comey again on April the 11th and talked about loyalty back and forth. He said, I've been very loyal to you, and in essence saying, will you be loyal back to me? And he said at this point, I didn't answer him. And you also today, finally now, John Carlin, have the president's attorney saying the president feels vindicated.
Well, I think in those conversations and in that back and forth, you also had Director Comey informing the president, according to this opening statement, that he had recounted their previous conversation to the then acting Deputy Attorney General, Dana Bente.
Right.
And when the president called, I think the second time, the president referenced and said, should I reach out? And it sounds like Director Comey tried to say, yes, you should through White House counsel. And the idea of potentially making public the results of an investigation, the appropriate channel, the one that's set up, there's actually a memorandum on White House contacts that's designed to ensure that that type of contact takes place lawyer to lawyer, White House counsel to Deputy Attorney General, to avoid either the actuality of interference with an investigation or the appearance. And you can see this kind of confused back and forth. To me, the most troubling of the exchanges that are detailed, and the rest do provide context for it, would be the direct request to end an investigation of an associate, if true, related to the investigation of Flynn.
And Matt Apuzzo, just finally, very quickly, the fact that Director Comey made these notes immediately after each one of these meetings or phone calls, I think adds to the remarkable nature of all this.
That's right. I mean, you have an FBI director who clearly was so uncomfortable with these interactions that he felt like he had to document them, and not just document them. I mean, it's like, this is where he was sitting, and this is where he was sitting, and I walked out the door near the grandfather clock, and then halfway through, this guy knocked on the door. I mean, it is really detailed stuff that is clearly intended for future consultation, and to say, this isn't just my memory. I sat down and did this in real time.
And we should point out once again, the president's attorney has issued a statement today saying the president feels vindicated, that he in essence thanked James Comey for repeating the fact he said that the president himself was not under investigation. So this will clearly continue. We're going to hear from Mr. Comey tomorrow himself. John Carlin, Matt Apuzzo, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.